I call it the squeeze. Interiors is always the thing that gets cut at the very end when, concrete has gone over budget and there's no more room for change orders or, I call it the squeeze.
The squeeze. I love this. The point in every project where the gaze turns to the interior, we find out that the budgets aren't what we would hope they'd be for all the finishing touches. Maybe we found out some of the vendors we chose aren't capable of executing the vision of the design team. So it's the squeeze. And it's also...
It is a number one frustration for interior designers.
So let's see if we can't do something about that. I'm Ken Bush, your host for this episode of the Material IQ podcast. And today we're going to talk about a couple of materials, 2DL and 3DL, that sit right in the middle of the squeeze. The squeeze being material substitutions that happen because of budget, design, or performance reasons, or sometimes the capabilities of your millworkers or cabinet shops. 2DL and 3DL, they can be squeezed in when other materials don't meet budgetary requirements. Or they can be squeezed out if your suppliers don't know how to work with these specialized materials. Let's do a little bit of housekeeping on the terminology that you're going to hear today. 2DL is two-dimensional laminates. 3DL is three-dimensional laminates. You can hear about PVC and a PVC alternative called PET, and that's polyethylene terephthalate. You're going to hear TFL, which means thermally fused laminate, known in the past as melamine boards or TFM panels. You can hear the term haptics, which is another way to describe our response to touch and texture. You can hear the term film, which really covers a broad category of decorative laminates and overlays. And you can hear FF&E, which means furniture, fixtures, and equipment. I've heard that term used in the hospitality specifications world, but it does apply to other project categories. And by the way, you can find out a lot more about all of these terms on materialintelligence.com in the material guides area. So it's time to introduce our expert guests. First up, you've already heard from my old friend
Jessica Calabrese.
Sorry, have I been pronouncing this wrong for decades?
How did you say it?
Calabrese.
That's the Italian pronunciation, so it's technically correct.
Okay.
Jessica Calabrese. I'm with Parksite Atlantic Plywood, and I manage the commercial specifications division, primarily focused on interiors for our surfaces business unit.
And just briefly, what are the challenges that you are hoping to address with a conversation like we're having today?
I think it's great to open up the dialogue to just talk about how do we bring more awareness into specification efforts and material functionality and application use. I think that's an important aspect of educating our A&D folks out there.
Super. Now, Greg, your turn. Who the heck is Greg O'Connell? Am I pronouncing that right, O'Connell?
Yeah, you nailed it, Ken. Greg, it's actually George. Greg O'Connell, sales manager for SSI North America. We are a decorative surfaces supplier to North America with different types of materials, 2D and 3D films. And then we also offer edge treatments through MKT North America. Education is key. The more that people know, the more confident they are. Because I don't want to know that there are people in the market that don't know what to do with our stuff, so it gets branded in a certain way, or things get isolated because of the fear of the unknown.
Well, and what I think is going on here is that, you hear things in the field. I mean, you know so much about your mix of materials and your competitive materials, and then you see how people are actually using them, and that inspires you as well, I think, that's really what kicked off this whole idea. Greg had shared an example with me of a customer that had been doing an incredible job with the 2D materials, and the conversation Greg had, the answers he was able to give the customer and the observations the customer shared with Greg were something that should not have been just a one-on-one conversation. They should have been something that we could broadcast to the entire industry. And then I talked to Jessica after that, and she's like, my teams, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jessica, but both your OEM sales teams and your spec teams are like, we're not really sure how to talk about some of this or how to recommend where it's used. And then you brought up, Jessica, the millwork, the importance of connecting with the millwork houses. And that just brought me right back to Greg's. And so there's this beautiful sort of self-feeding loop here where I think there's a conversation between you two guys that could be very, very helpful to the industry. So, Greg, give us the 30,000-foot view of the materials that SSI offers.
We have really a few primary brands. We lead with our primary brand from Klockner Pentaplast called Pentadecor. Pentadecor comes in two primary fashions from SSI in North America. 3D laminates is the primary for the Pentadecor. Really classically known in North America for the supermats.
Another important brand from SSI is
Recover, which is that is also a 3D laminate that is made from recycled water bottles. It's a PET, 90% post-consumer, which is a very high level of post-consumer recycled content. It's pretty exciting. It's not post-industrial, post-consumer, which has its challenges as well, but it's definitely an interesting product.
A quick note here about the PVC used in the materials that SSI distributes. They are plasticizer and phthalate free. These are rigid PVC films that don't contain the plasticizers like you might find in shower curtains, shampoo bottles, and LVT resilient flooring. So, Greg, how would you say your product mix is evolving at SSI?
I would say over the last 2 to 3 years, we've really robustly increased our 2D program with Pentadecor. So this is now for profile wrapping and flat lamination, typically found in, like 5-piece doors or, those classic style shaker looks. We also represent a brand called Radiance, and Radiance is a very high-end 2D PET film. Pentadecor being PVC in both 2D and 3D. And then Radiance, again, is PET, comes in high gloss and super matte, very high-end, robust surface protection and those things that would be expected out of a 2D film.
And so just in the spirit of clarification, a 3D laminate is a flexible overlay, a laminate, that can be adhered to 5 of 6 sides of a panel, a contoured or a shaped panel, all in one processing step, right? So let's say it's a cabinet door. You can surface the face, the tops and bottoms, and the edges, but not the back, all in one processing step. And so that's why we say 3DL, also known as RTF, vinyls, thermofoils, right? A million other terms. And then 2DL is really an application where it's the material, the overlay, the laminate is wrapped around 3 of the 5 sides, the face and opposing edges. Am I tracking? Am I explaining that properly, Greg?
Yeah, roughly. Yeah. When you think about 2D can come in so many different fashions. So the proper description, unlike 3D is pretty straightforward. 2D, if you think of a molding, if you can think of a 5-piece door or a molding, a crown molding, you can really effectively cover the visual side of the piece with a thinner yet still engineered to perform in its resting place properly. So if that's a crown molding, if that's a 5-piece door, if that's a decorative frame for a picture, what have you, it 2D comes, it could be a flat panel.
So from a surface finished perspective, a few years ago, everybody was wild about high gloss. Is that still the case?
From a trend perspective now, it's very little high gloss. It's monochromatic at best.
Interesting. And you mentioned super matte, which is that the same as the anti-fingerprint stuff that is so popular?
Supermet can come in variations depending on the coating system and the level that you buy, meaning, from the menu, if you will. But yeah, Supermet typically comes with a variety of performance characteristics and anti-fingerprint. As much oil as we leave behind as people, we still refuse to believe it, and we don't want to see it. And so that's where these new top coating applications are they're leading the way and allowing specification on mass scales to be okay, because those specifications demand it.
And when you say leaving oils behind, we're talking about fingerprints, right? We're talking about skin oil and
yeah, I mean, anytime you touch something, you're leaving a fingerprint, but we refuse to want to see that. So we demand that our surfaces really do not show that.
And then 3D laminates, really, you mentioned solid colors, but they're in wood grains, they're in metallics. Do you want to give us an idea of the design scope of a 3D laminate?
So from a texture standpoint, we can provide textured emboss that would feel like an oak tree or a modern wood pour, where it's, striated drops with a very velvety, soft texture. From a haptic standpoint or from a shopping standpoint, I think, at least in North America, we shop with our hands. We very much reach out and touch before we make a comment on how we think something looks. We can't wait to touch that Supermat and really feel the haptic part of it and decide if we really like the color or not. It's very interesting.
Let's talk just a little bit about what 3D laminate replaces, I guess, in the real world, right? Because you can get wood looks, you can get the solid colors, you can get the different finishes from high gloss to super matte. What is the advantage of using 3D laminate over some of the, let's say, legacy choices or traditional choices for those finishes? And what are those other materials and finishes that you're replacing with 3DL?
Yeah, well, 3DL provides, as you described earlier, 5 of the 6 sides. So if we think about from a store fixture perspective, if we have high wear, high impact, below the waist applications that typically would, really take a beating. Traditionally, we've designed with things that have been very rigid and very supported and have tendencies to fracture and chip over time. 3D laminates, because of its composition and its structure underneath it, MDF, typically don't fracture. The sharp instruments are bad news for 3D laminates, but in an impact situation or a wear situation, transactionally on a counter or below the waist, people rubbing up against it constantly, they really outperform a lot of the materials that are typically specified, or at least in the price category. So again, sharp instruments and high heat are no good for 3D. That's our fail points. Those are not good. Where other decorative surfaces definitely outperform 3D. But when we're talking about impact and wear resistance on longevity, even in comparison to something like paint, it can be achieved at a much less cost to paint a door over time. But if you have to replace, or the idea is to add on and maintain, 3D laminates definitely give a leg up to that type of decorative surface when we're competing. So it's a wide category of competition. In a lot of ways, my partners are also my competition. So our responsibility is to make sure that we partner with Pentadecor Films or any brand of films that we offer in edge banding to people in the industry like the TFL suppliers. So it's really important for us to have those cooperations, but in the same breath, we're both fighting for in some cases, we're both challenged for the same project.
Sure.
Where we're competing against each other. So it's the right material in the right application for the right expectations, I think.
So, and because, okay, you mentioned sharp instruments, right? 3DL is a thermoplastic, and so if you drop a scissors point down onto it, it's going to make a nick, right? Just like if it was veneer or paint, right? So I know you're comparing yourself to all these other laminate materials, these super durable materials, but 3DL really replaces paint and solid wood because you can carve these contoured edges, you can carve interior details in a door front, you can engineer in a cutout in the middle of a 3DL panel, like when you're at the doctor's office and they have the little hole where you toss the gloves into the wastebasket, right, through the top of the thing. So, 3DL is really replacing other more traditional finishes that have all this design flexibility, odd-shaped pieces, contoured edges, soft edges, et cetera, et cetera. So, I've heard you make this comparison before. I'm like, you're comparing yourself to the bulletproof stuff in our industry, which is what design-wise, what you're really competing with are these really fragile, more natural and more traditional surfaces that don't stand up to cleaning like in a healthcare situation, right? So it's kind of like the context of what you're talking about needs to be really firmly established. And so 3DL is the most flexible laminate material we have. And the cost of that is, well, you can't stab it, right? And you can't put a boiling pot of water on it. Sure. Sounds like the same thing with a painted surface or a veneer surface. Those are going to fail under the same situations. A quick word here about the miracle material that is MDF. MDF is made from the fiber of the parts of trees or the pieces of wood that are left over from other woodworking processes, what used to be waste. It's refined down to particles and then further refined down to fibers and turned into panels that have this very smooth, very homogeneous surface, even as you machine into the wood. So any kind of material like a 3D laminate or a 2D laminate that is thin enough to show through any imperfections that you might have in the substrate, MDF is an excellent choice. And it's also, of course, because it is using waste wood, wood that we used to landfill or burn, it makes it a very sustainable component once you put the durable, long-lasting 2DL or 3DL material on it. And then the application categories for 3DL, right? We're talking commercial and residential all over the board. I talk about healthcare a lot because this is a lot of feature stories I'm working on right now are in the healthcare world. And 3DL, because it does that, laminate 5 of 6 sides of a panel in one processing step. I cannot get that phrase out of my mouth because I think it's really important. There's efficiencies there, but it also seals that panel for easy cleaning. And because it is a thermoplastic surface, you can clean it with really simple compounds, right? I think I've done this on some CEUs in the healthcare world. Soap and water.
Because it's hydrophobic, because it stands up to a lot of common and maybe not so common surface cleaning agents or even practices.
A quick side note here on the testing that needs to be done on surface materials that are going to be used in healthcare applications. They need to be able to withstand not just the cleaning agents used in those settings, but also any other chemicals that might splash around, body fluids, disinfectants, other types of things used in a medical setting. So while cleaning these materials is relatively easy with soap and water, they need to stand up to a lot harsher chemistry than just soap and water. But I digress. Greg, please continue.
When you talk about reagents, it's not Lysol anymore. It's not just Lysol. It's 50 versions of the same thing. And it's going to make an impact on what you test and what you have available. And really, it's driven by our customers. The things that are obvious, okay, iodine and betadine and those things, yeah, that's pretty clear. But, when things change and technology changes, not just in our industry, but in cleaning and everything else, this UVC lighting has made us reconsider coatings and how long it can be contacted for. It's an interesting challenge. 3D still performs in that world I would say as good, if not better than most.
Yeah.
It's an aggressive environment. It's very hard.
Well, and
Yep.
that same sort of desire for a low maintenance, easy to clean surface is not just limited to healthcare too, right? I mean, I'm doing stories on education environments and how important it is to keep our preschools as sanitary as possible, even though the entire population are little germ buckets running around. And then also multifamily. Developers they don't have access to the cleaning crews. They can't afford them, or they're just not available, as apartments turn over, or as the community rooms or the shared kitchens and the other amenity spaces in multifamily, need to be cleaned by the tenants. Well, you got to keep it simple. It's important to note that in commercial specification especially, very few of these materials work in a vacuum. They are part of a package of other materials. They need to coordinate functionally, they need to coordinate design-wise with other types of materials. So what can distributors and material suppliers do to make sure those projects turn out successfully?
As far as the specification side of it, I really think it just comes down to really educating and thinking about how to include 3DL into the laminate conversation, right? So a designer can essentially pick whatever aesthetic they want to, and then they can pick the laminate product that best fits the application. So, I mean, one question we get faced with all the time is, what is the radius tolerance? Well, it depends. So if you're looking at TFL, if you're looking at HPL, there's obviously some limitations there. Enter 3DL, as a solution. So that's why we really tried to work with designers and educate them to include us on their whole design process and the applications, because, we see it all the time where a specifier will put into a written specification that states, okay, we want melamine, but it has to meet NEMA standards, which obviously don't exist for melamine. And so we really see a confusion in the industry between the differences of TFL, HPL, and 3DL, right? And they're not always used properly. So that's where we really need to kind of group them together and target the market as a whole, that there's always a solution. I mean, we can really achieve just about any interior application between the three product lines, and they can work together.
Mm-hmm. And this is something, and you mentioned design matching earlier, Greg, design matching programs with these other materials. In a perfect world, our industry would supply design and then be the consultants and the experts to advise what material carrying this design should be used in each part of your project, if that makes sense. So if we have good design matches between HPL, TFL, and 3DL, and of course now 2DL as well, how do we educate the specifier about the whole package rather than just the vertical of this or that or that or that material? In other words, like you're saying, offering, Jessica, offering the ability to design first and then worry about the application later, because we have the material to suit, high use healthcare. Or, one thing I didn't mention was the use of 3DL in retail. I mean, forever and ever, like the Best Buy cash counters were 3DL. Target's cash counters are 3DL material. And I can't think of a much more abusive situation than that. But they don't need that kind of wear resistance for maybe some of the vertical surfaces. Maybe in some areas, Greg, to your point, where there's, people are throwing scissors and scalpels around, maybe you want HPL or TFL on those surfaces. So, I know there's cooperation between different suppliers, and I can't think of any companies actually as a manufacturer that offer 3DL, TFL, and HPL. So is our industry, Jessica, doing a good enough job as the individual vendors who have matching programs? Are they team players when it comes to helping you make the case for choosing design first and let us help you figure out the exact material for the application?
I can tell you, Ken, it's definitely come a long way. uh, the last 15 years, we've seen a lot more cohesiveness. But I will tell you that there are still challenges just, finding the exact right match when you start mixing these materials, where maybe one has a really long lead time. Maybe you need an edge banding that matches a particular 3DL or HPL color and it has a really long lead time. Well, now, the whole project and everything is in jeopardy because you're out trying to source and find the appropriate match. Again, we have a lot more cohesiveness. The colors definitely are coming together a lot better than they ever have. I know that I've seen some really great applications where a TFL and 3DL were working together on a panel, or 2DL, and visually the designs work great together. And it also provides a good application at a cost-effective solution for a customer. What it takes to get that downstream, we can definitely have some room for improvement there.
Well, and this is what what started this conversation was you looking for some of this kind of guidance for your teams out in the field and how to better make the case for working with multiples of these materials rather than just, okay, we made our decision, it's going to be XYZ material, we can move on. And then I think another thing you said really sparked something, Jessica, a conversation I had with some commercial interior designers was getting the interior design team involved at the outset of a project rather than bringing them in. Okay, we've decided on everything else, and we've got this much of a budget left. Here you go, interior design team. Good luck. Right? Do you find that kind of with your market?
I call it the squeeze. Interiors is always the thing that gets cut at the very end when, concrete has gone over budget and there's no more room for change orders or, I call it the squeeze. And it is a number one frustration for interior designers. I can attest to that in various conversations. There's also the value engineering side of it, right? So how do I get the highest end aesthetic within this price budget? So, it really is a challenge, and it needs to be, the design teams need to be included in the onset of the whole design process. Because, when you get into things like healthcare, for instance, there's a functionality component to all of this. There's an efficiency component to all of this. How can we create a design that is not only cleanable, that's aesthetically pleasing, that has a long ROI on it, can stand time of use, but also cuts down on the overall operating cost of the hospital itself? Things like, less hours in maintenance and cleaning. So all of those things are challenges that designers are faced with now. And so if they know more about all of these different material options and how they can work together, it'll solve a lot of problems.
When is the crucial moment for this to take place?
This happens during the bidding process. So generally, when a project goes out to bid, let's say that a GC gets awarded, he's sending his sub-bid packages out. The millwork fabricator firms, they're quoting in a price group 1 or a price group 2 within a certain product line. And so then the designer will go back and say, well, I want this product, I want this color. And they're saying, well, we didn't quote it that way. So we were awarded this bid. And so you've got to choose between this color group that meets this price point because that's how we bid it. And by the way, there's no more funds for change order approvals. So they've got to go back to the drawing board. So a lot of it really happens during the bidding process, where what I call the squeeze is really just a timing thing between the finished selection and when the bid actually happens.
So this sounds like a fairly detailed conversation to be getting into when you're weighing the relative benefits of different materials and how effective they'll be for the specified application versus the costs. It sounds like it can be a pretty in-depth conversation. Is this something that you find yourself engaging in often?
Absolutely, we do. And in fact, it is the biggest value that an architectural and design rep has to a specifier, to be the lookout, their eyes and ears, and helping them ensure that their material selection doesn't get changed downstream for various reasons. So a really good specifier will reach out to their rep and say, listen, this is what I'm being told, and then we'll work on behalf of that specifier downstream. We might do things like, well, listen, there might be a price concession, it might be an inventory thing, it might be something as easy as a change out from a substrate. That's an important piece of this, right? The substrate piece of this. So it could be, okay, the architect designer calls and says, we're being told that this material is not available or it's discontinued. Well, it's because it was specified on particle board and you can't put that material on particle board. Or, it really has to be discussed in an entire solution and an entire package with the substrate to ensure that the material is available and that it's even a viable combination. It really just comes down to sometimes there are millwork or firms that are chosen, fabricators that are chosen early in the bid package phase, and then a designer selects something like a 3DL, and that millwork doesn't have membrane pressing capabilities, right? So the number one thing that we try to do is change it. Another valuable thing that we do is make sure that we bring partners to the table that support the product line, that can actually offer the services that are needed to win that bid package.
So you brought up a really important point there a second ago, Jessica, that it's not really clear sometimes to the specifier how this material ends up in their project. And you mentioned, somebody picking out a millwork house that may not have 3D laminating capabilities. In our world, there are lots of companies that specialize in 3DL components, and so you do the make versus buy sort of thing, but that's not always in the margin plan for certain millwork houses, I think. How do we prevent these kinds of dead-end specification nightmares?
We need to start by being advocates for our designers, downstream. And that really just comes down to being part of the project team. So saying, okay, if this is what you're considering, we'll have to make some adaptations, or the capabilities for this product doesn't work with this, or here are some certified and, renowned millwork fabricator companies that we know can achieve this, so that, we'll help you bring this bid package to your GC and loop in that millwork company. As far as, whose responsibility is it? It really is everyone's responsibility, right? So it's the general contractor's responsibility to ensure that when they get a bid package that it's going to be met. It's their responsibility to make sure that their subcontractor, that millwork or fabricator, is following along the guidelines of what has been quoted and what the scope of work that has been indicated. And then it's our job as the liaisons to make sure that all of that happens.
Greg, do you have any insights from the real world on how to prevent, sort of these specification doom loops where I like this, but I can't get it. It got knocked out of my spec, and I have no idea how to change this next time around.
The amount of designers that I come in contact with over a year's time is staggering. And I know how hard they work. And I know what they're up against. We get calls all the time because our material name gets put on there, Penta Decor, and, I need to buy 5 sheets of vertical grade, for a project. Can I use my regular red adhesive that I use on Wilson Art? That's not the material. Sorry. And we go through an explanation. For those that don't know, membrane pressing uses a water-based adhesive, which is why it contributes to indoor air quality on LV4. It's a different process. And, the people that have taken the time to understand what they're specifying, sadly, we run right up against the people that Jessica just described. They'll just move on and say, I can't get it.
Hmm.
And then they'll move on to something that they're more accustomed to working with that fits into their production facility. I hear Jessica loud and clear. I hear the scenario. I know the scenario. I live the scenario. Um, and we're the ones that get that back end call that say, well, I want to buy it, but they're not looking to buy it and actually use it the way that's meant to be used. So it's a challenge.
Yeah, because 3DL is creating 3DL components is a little bit of a specialty. You need specific adhesives knowledge. You need to know what you're doing with your substrates, the MDF, and of course, then there's the membrane presses that are their own animal as well in this industry. Another quick side note here. Membrane presses have come up a couple times in this conversation. That's the machinery used to apply the 3D laminate to the carved MDF pieces. Either there's a membrane, like a bladder, in the press that pushes the laminate down into the contoured pieces of the MDF, or a vacuum is created below the parts and the thermoplastic material, which has been slightly heated to be pliable, is pulled down over the carved pieces and basically sucked into every nook and cranny that has been carved in that MDF. It's important to note also here that these 3D laminate materials are formed to the piece. They're not just glued down, but they actually take on the shape of the piece, which reduces any possibility of them delaminating if they're pressed right and used with the right kind of adhesive. So that's everything you needed to know about membrane pressing of 3D laminates, but we're afraid to ask. So it's now time to move on to our discussion about 2D laminates.
I think that when we're talking about 2DL and how does that fit into the big picture, right? So you've got TFL, HPL, 3DL. So what's the in with 2DL that makes it favorable in comparison?
2D laminates are decorative surfaces that can cover the face and then opposing sides of a piece, whereas 3DL, of course, is 5 sides: the face, the top edges, the side edges. So 2DLs are used for things like moldings, crown moldings, cove moldings, picture frame components that are then assembled into further products, let's say like a 5-piece cabinet door. They can be polymer-based and they can be paper-based. They're generally a little less cost than 3D laminates for the material itself, and they're designed to be applied usually by profile wrapping machines, which run at a pretty high speed, but are really only able to be set up to make one part at a time. So this is for high volume, like we said, architectural moldings and door and frame components. They can also be used to laminate entire flat panel faces for reasons we'll discuss in a bit. And once again, they are part of the overall package that an architectural interior design specifier has access to complete their project with the right budget, performance, and design parameters in mind. It's important to know that 2DL is not a lower performing material versus 3DL. Right, Greg?
From a 2D perspective, we can provide the same, if not better, performance in a 2D film than I can in a 3D film. And 2D allows us to kind of hang in that pocket and really live and breathe very well in the 5-piece door world, especially.
And 2DL is growing, I think. I've recently published a story in, I believe it was Closets and Organized Storage magazine. And Greg and you and I started these conversations earlier this summer. 2DL is really kind of on the upswing right now. Is that still true? Did I perceive that correctly?
Yeah, the perception is exactly right. We just recently updated our 2DL page on our website to add even more solid and printed items. The beauty of our 2DL program, and this is something that it really needs to be said because we starve for these exact matches. And versatility in the design world. So why do we pick 2D? Well, it's probably because of cost at some point, or really design specific. But the beauty of it is we actually have matching wood grains in 2D and in 3D. And then we have solid colors in matching 2D and in 3D that allow people to have that design confidence. And we have partners in the industry, TFL partners in the industry that are cheering us on for those matches as well and supporting it. So that's a 2D competitor in a matter of speaking, but also a tremendous partner to us. And this is a category for SSI that really didn't exist before. Really, in two and a half, 3 years, we have literally built over 70 stocked 2D items. And, the Radiance program continues to be a tremendous success from a PET standpoint. When we have those needs that it can't be PVC, we definitely have opportunities in polypropylene as well as PETs. Everything that we hear in North America right now, 3D is important and 2D is vital.
What
you absolutely have to have it.
What specifically, applications-wise, is 2DL being found on where it wasn't before? Or is it just an increase in certain types of components and design features that 2DL's? What's the growth all about? I guess that's
it's a good question. We launch a trend book about every 18 to 24 months that really talks about the 4 mega trends. And it's color and concept based from emotion and design, and these things really are overarching trends. And then as we experience what we would call micro trends or things that happen within the mega trend, that kind of shows maturation. If you think about 5-piece doors, that has been around for over 40 years. That door was made in high pressure laminate in Detroit by a company called Lamica. And that door was the talk of the town over 40 years ago.
So, in other words,
this isn't new. We're designing with 5-piece doors. We're designing with profile wrap pieces. We're finding ways to incorporate flat panel lamination in combinations of shape, as well as elegance and, just simple concepts of solid colors. So from a cost perspective, like if you're looking at how much film is used and wasted versus, one over the other, 2D dominates in that perspective because, if you're running a lot in those moldings, then you're very efficient and effective with how much material you're using. 3D, you have to have some space on the table, and there's a little bit of, spillage to get the part to press properly.
Right. There's some leftover material scraps after you cut the pieces
if
out.
you will. Yeah, exactly.
One thing I was surprised to learn about 2D laminates is that...
Well, there's a lot of flat panel lamination, too. There's a lot of 4x8s that get flat laminated with 2DL material. Yeah. For, whether it's a wall panel application, we have tremendous business in our Radiance and our PET walls wall program, as well as our PVC wall program as well. So
why would somebody choose to flat laminate a 2DL, right, which could normally be sort of the realm of a TFL or an HPL panel? Why use 2DL?
Yeah, well, it's design consistency is probably first and foremost. And then I would say performance. We are going to get a lot of stain protection that we didn't get, or impact resistance. I go back to casinos all the time. Flat panel applications in casinos is a real thing. They have a ton of flat walls everywhere, and they get beat up really bad in 2D, starting to get into those retail environments where they're specifying specifically, I want this material with this coating. Because they understand, as to Jessica's point earlier, education is key.
Yeah.
So if we can explain to people what you get and let them ask the question of their other materials.
Well, and when you mentioned, I think the first thing you said when I asked why use it, you said design matching or color matching, right? So meaning that is exactly the same material flat laminated to the center of this panel that's being wrapped around the moldings that frame the panel in the case of,
In the world of materials, and I am a partner to a lot of different people. SSI is a partner, and I have commitments that we are going to match. And I'm here to tell you right now that anybody that has ever gone through the process of matching, there are very few crossover materials that match one to one. There's very few, even when they're called or industry accepted as a one to one.
So to get an exact match,
It is always best to design with the same material across every aspect. You're never going to get a better match that way, ever. But most people don't design that way.
well, and I mean, part of the matching challenges, I think, is not just the material and the color and the way they're printed. It's also the textures that are applied and the way these different material surfaces catch light a different way, right? So it's not really the material. It's just there's a wall I think you hit when you're talking about how light interacts with the surfaces of these different engineered materials. It's just they're different animals.
It's funny you say light, Ken, because that's part of our what we call launch sheets for our materials. So for every item that we stock, which is a lot, you get some sexy language to help inspire the sales mind, as well as information that seems simple, but the full repeat of the design is also something that is really important for people, and also found when we're talking about wood grains, also found on our launch sheet.
Where would people go to look at this launch sheet, Greg?
Oh, Ken, www.ssinorthamerica.com.
Jessica, we just sort of dove real deep into 2DL. Did this spark any ideas or any sort of needs that you have on communicating exactly what 2DL is and where to use it?
Absolutely. I think, the first thing that popped into my mind is the balance of aesthetic and affordability. And I can see that in FF&E applications all day long. What a great solution for a lot of FF&E product. So even RTA cabinetry, which, is becoming a little bit less competitive from what I hear in the coming months.
Right.
So it's there's really a great channel and opportunity for the 2DL. Just that balance of functionality, price, and aesthetic, I think, is really a home run to designers who are looking for all three of those factors there.
So this whole conversation today has been about trying to demystify 3D laminates and 2D laminates and help the spec teams who are calling on architects and designers do a more effective job of educating them on their material options at the outset of the project. Is there anything we left on the field? I mean, what's the big takeaway here?
Doing exactly what we're doing today is, absolutely a great start. Just having a conversation, bringing awareness, putting the product out there front facing, into the marketplace. Really making a concerted effort to go after those areas where we see opportunity to provide a 2DL or 3DL product and application as a solution, and really just listening to the designer struggles. Really just asking the right questions and being able to offer solutions is really key.
And I think also, being able to express the challenges that we're addressing, express those challenges in the same terms that the design community is expressing them. But are designers and architects comfortable with suppliers and distributors being so proactive, reaching out with advice at the outset of their design process?
Oftentimes they are, right? Because what they don't want to have to do is go back to the drawing board and spend more billable hours. That's why specification is so repeatable. Because once you have a product that performs and you've used it and you know that it achieves what you want it to achieve, it's repeatable. From that point on, it becomes trusted. So the education piece of that starts first and foremost, and then it moves into repeatable process, which is obviously where you gain more awareness and more case studies and examples and comfort and trust and all of those things, right? So designers don't know what they don't know. If there's a product out there that solves a problem for them, they are absolutely willing to sit and listen to how you can help them solve a problem. Because at the end of the day, our job is to make their job easier. So if we can bring something to the table, they are absolutely willing to listen.
This has been a production of Material Intelligence, LLC, made possible by SSI North America, ssinorthamerica.com. Thanks for listening. We hope we've improved your material IQ by a point or two.
I call it the squeeze. At the end of the day, our job is to make their job easier. We can't be strangers for too much longer, Ken.
No.
It's been a while. We got the juices flowing here. We got to keep it going.
You can find out more about all of the material and sustainability topics covered in this podcast at materialintelligence.com and climatepositivenow.org. Please visit those sites, subscribe, and click like on this podcast. See you next time.